Auckland Council and Auckland Transport set out this plan to slash transport emissions by 64% by 2030. Among the targets were halving car use, did you hear that? A 13-fold increase in cycling, and a third of all cars being electric. Are you kidding me? Councillor Daniel Newman says the plan's unfunded, it's delusional, and it's time for a rethink. And I think he's probably on the money. Daniel, g'day, nice to have you on the program.
Good afternoon, Duncan.
This is a bit tired now, this plan, isn't it? It needs to be sort of shelved, I would have thought, and start again.
Well, I think that the first thing that Aucklanders should do is laugh at it, because that's what it deserves. And the second thing is that it needs to be understood for what it is. It's an unfunded mandate. It's aspirational, which in local government speak is generally a weasel word for a knowingly unfunded mandate. And thirdly, what you have to remember is that, of course, it was written with the perspective of negotiating with the government that lost the last election. So we have a new government. That new government has announced a National Land Transport Fund program, which is so radically different to what my colleagues envisaged when the transport emissions reduction pathway was adopted in late 2022. So, of course, we should be rethinking this, and I'm very hopeful that the Mayor will support me as we progress towards the forthcoming mayoral proposal for the annual plan.
I think last time you voted on this, there were 3 of you who opposed it, if I'm right. How many of you oppose it now? Surely is there any realism around the council table on this?
Well, I'd like to think that all of my colleagues, to a greater or lesser extent, are realists. I think that reality starts to hit home when the government says, well, we are a 51% funder of most of your big transport capital projects, because councils don't fund transport 100% usually. We fund it, part fund it, and then business case and bid for funding from New Zealand Transport Agency. Simeon Brown, who is a good friend of mine, but Simeon Brown has been very crystal clear. The priorities are different to the priorities of the previous government. We don't have the regional fuel tax. We have a new government policy statement on land transport. And there are several other, Labor non-starters that have been shelved. So I think that the Transport Emissions Reduction Pathway, or TERP, I think it is one of those things that some of my colleagues have signed up to because it's comfortable to say that they're committed to something absent having the funding to do it and treating it as an aspiration. But, I don't actually want to mortgage my constituents with compounding double-digit rate increases year on year on year. I represent some of the poorest property owners on low and fixed incomes, and they are telling me as I knock on doors in my ward that we're still in the cost of living crisis. So I don't want to try and manoeuvre, stress them, pressure them to make radical and unrealistic and inconvenient changes to their lives when I think there are other priorities that we should focus on.
This is putting climate change ahead of human life in Auckland. Because what this does here, if you were to halve your car use in the next 4 to 5 years, how on earth do we live? How will we get around? There's not the alternative. And how will you get 100 million trips going to 550 million public transport trips in the next 4 years? It just doesn't. It's not even within sort of touching distance. It's so far-fetched and so delusional that, as you pointed out at the start of this interview, you said just laugh at it. You should giggle all the way to bed on this one. It is just ridiculous. It is just so far-fetched and so out of reach. Now, I know it's ambitious, but you've got to have, with ambition, you actually have to have achievable ambition,
Yeah. Well, we did actually have an experience of reducing our carbon footprint so dramatically, and it was called the level 4 lockdowns under COVID. Anybody want to go back to that in Auckland? I don't think so.
No, thanks.
That the reality is that people have to go to work, that, mums and dads need to go and buy the groceries, that it's important that people are able to travel from one location to the next. And absolutely, I would love to have, a train station or a bus stop which is conveniently located to every home so that people could, access public transport services that are so convenient as to be able to leave the car at home. But you know what? This is not New York. This is not London. This is Auckland, and we have to cut our cloth with what we've got. And I can tell you what we don't have. We don't have a whole lot of multi-billions of dollars in unfunded capex that we could pour into this pipe dream. So I think it's time that we rethink it. And I believe that if the debate was to be recommitted, if the price tag was to be presented back to Aucklanders, and if my good colleagues, in the run-up to an election, were told, right, you want this, fund it, and hike the rates to cover it, I tell you what, I wouldn't be in a minority of three. I would be in an overwhelming majority. Some of my colleagues would vote with me because they are scared. Other colleagues would reflect the reality that times have changed and our budget setting processes need to match it.
Is the Auckland Council going to subsidise electric cars for people? Because if we want to bring all these electric cars into Auckland, looking at the cost of them, we might as well just import them en masse out of China. So is the council going to put money up? Or how do we afford these electric cars? Might be okay for Auckland Transport with all their fancy budgets and cars, but the households don't have the sort of money, Daniel.
I would never vote to subsidise a vehicle for my constituents to have as a private vehicle in the garage, whether diesel, petrol, electric. I wouldn't do it, and neither of my colleagues. I mean, the whole thing around electric vehicles was over-reliance on the on the clean car discount or the use tax, which the government has shelved, and I think they're right to shelve it, by the way. These are measures which, when you read them, you think, oh gosh, that sounds great. But then you think, actually, what's the practical application? You start to realise, we can't do that, we can't do that, we can't do that. Now, the reality is that we do spend a lot of money on public transport, and I think that's good. I would like to build more park and rides that people can park up and use the trains. I would like to get more footpaths built. I would like to business case more on-demand ride shares so that we can have new services as well as improvements to existing services. All of this needs to be business case managed, understanding that there's limited funding. But the idea that what you do is you impose an unfunded policy mandate and then use that to stretch and grind and to turn our budgets inside out so that we have to retrofit the money to give effect to this is nonsensical. And I suspect as we move forward with this next annual plan round that this is going to be very topical, and I think I might win the argument.
I think you probably already have, and everybody knows it. Where's the mayor on this? I haven't caught up with him and haven't heard what he's had to say. Have you had private words with him about this?